Welcome to the Art Cityscape Podcast, the official podcast of Springville City, Utah, where we publish important information and insightful interviews for the benefit of our citizens. Well, we'd like to welcome Jason Miller. We appreciate you being here, and maybe you can just take a moment and introduce yourself to the citizens. You're brand new here with Springville City Power, and talk a little bit just about your background and introduction. Then I've got some questions that I'm sure would be on the minds of some citizens, and we can kind of go from there. So, Jason, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jason Miller. I have actually an interesting background, probably not traditional for what we'd find in a power department for a municipality. I've been with the city now for about 9 months. I started earlier this year. My background is primarily in finance and banking. We came to Utah actually to finish my MBA at BYU, and once that was completed, we stuck. And have just had a variety of experience through startup companies that I've been involved with, as well as I was actually directly involved with the power department for Springville for about 14 years. So back in 2010, I joined the power board, which was then the half board that now is the utility board, has been rolled into the utility board. And so then in 2015, when I became a city council representative, then that was also my assignment, was to work specifically with that board and the organizations that Springville Power are directly involved with.
Wonderful.
So I've had a lot of touch with the city and with the power department.
Well, that's great. And the citizens need to know that the power department is a business, and we run it like a business. And it's just been such a great asset to the city and the people that are there, the employees, just incredible men and women who are down doing all kinds of things. We'll talk a little bit about it. So one thing I wanted to just ask you and maybe have you explain to the citizens, we hear a lot about the Whitehead Generation Station. Do you want to kind of explain what that is and why that's there and kind of the capacity of that station and what it does for the citizens?
Sure. So the Whitehead Power Plant, which is just over on the west side of town, just east of the freeway, it was actually first set up and built, and they started adding generation to it back in the 80s. And so the power department has been in business for quite a while. But what originally happened is they actually procured engines really over the course of a decade in several different sets. They pulled a lot of generators and generating capacity out of the old Tennessee Valley Authority. So they retasked and pulled these generators out from different places across the country and brought them here to Whitehead to serve as a resource for the citizens of Springville. So the purpose of that and the size of that is currently there's about 21 megawatts of capacity.
Now tell me what 21 megawatts. Yeah. I'm not sure what.
If you think about a megawatt is approximately enough to power 1,000 houses.
Okay.
And so as you look at that, we have a series right now with a recent project that was completed. We have 5 brand new or relatively new Caterpillar generators, which are smaller, and then we have 2 larger ones that are still the legacy generators that we talked about or I mentioned earlier. Those are about 5 megawatts capacity each. So the whole total comes to about approximately 21. That was originally set up, and the whole thinking behind it is with the industrial park and some of the large companies. It was brought online as a way to help give them, in a sense, it was early. They spoke about being an insurance policy of sorts, a way to back up those companies specifically. That original purpose never was wholly met, although it may have been implied that would be the practice. What it's become more of a peaking station. So during the summer, when we have really high loads and the energy markets are very expensive and power is very pricey, it's a great opportunity for us. If we run those engines during that time period, it helps us shave off and decrease the amount of volatility in power bills.
So you use those generators during a time when, as you call it, the height of the consumption is really high, and the ability to go out in the market and buy energy for the city is at its most expensive, because if we're using a lot, so is every other city.
Yes.
And the energy becomes very expensive, and so these generators make it so it's less expensive for the citizens overall, and they're able to have lower costs, which it can be interpreted into lower rates for them, of benefit to the citizens. Does that sound right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about this peaking that we talked about and the cost of it and the use of the generators to be able to help. So roughly, just give me an idea of how much a megawatt would cost, or what you're budgeting for, what your thoughts are when you put a budget together.
So as a city and as a power department, we come up with a budget each year, as you just mentioned, and we are trying to target, for example, for this year, we try and target about $70 per megawatt.
Okay. So, and the base load is how many megawatts in the city?
So our base load is roughly 25, which is roughly covered by NEBO's production.
Okay. So in the summertime, what do you peak out at? It's not the 25. It's how much?
Yeah, just last summer we hit nearly 72 megawatts.
Okay, so there's a big difference between 72 and 25.
Yes.
And you have to go out in the market or generate it in order to make up the difference. So how high can the cost go per megawatt out in the open market?
So I mentioned that $70 target. We've seen power prices in the open market up to $1,200.
$1,200.
Yes.
So our budget would say 70, and if we have to go by this peaking, it could cost us $1,200.
Which would obviously have a significant impact to residents and yes, consumers.
So when you run the generators, roughly how much does that cost you to be able to run as opposed to $1,200?
So the run cost, I would say, is approximately $40.
Okay, so it's a great business decision to have generators,
Right.
to use generators, and to help shave off that peaking that could be very expensive for the citizen.
Absolutely. And there was also some additional purpose to having the plant there co-located to where the wastewater plant is. Originally, they had talked about that facility providing a backup power source for the wastewater plant should power go out generally. So you could restart one of those engines independently and power the wastewater plant from that. So an insurance policy of sorts, you got to make sure that you don't have issues with your wastewater if you don't have the power to run the pumps and the screens and the different facilities there. So there's also in the early thinking and the thought process behind developing that plant, which is a huge asset to the city, tremendous asset to the city, because it does just what we just mentioned, which is decrease volatility in pricing and allows to provide reliable power. But also the notion that if we had a widespread outage that was to be prolonged for several days, we still have some development work to do on this, but there's the thought process that we could potentially island, which means that we'd be able to set up certain parts of the city to roll at least with limited amounts of power over time. Now that would only be in a prolonged outage because you'd have to do significant changes and switching within the system. But it's certainly a capability we think we have, and the engineers have told us we have.
So to take that idea a little bit further is that that's just in development. It's not possible today,
Right.
But you're looking at the ability to be able to isolate the city. I'll make this up into 4 quadrants, and that each quadrant would get so many hours in a day if it's a long term to help people with their freezers and their refrigerators and their oxygen or whatever the case might be. Does that sound right?
Potentially. And I would say the system is capable of it. We're working through the strategies and the technological changes and adaptations we'd have to make to actually, do that.
Yeah, and it's much more than just flipping a switch and turning
Yes.
another switch. I mean,
Yes.
you have to, and your people would understand this so that I don't. But the frequencies and the waves and all this, that it just doesn't easily happen. And so, I think that would be a great asset for the city. So answer one more question, then we'll talk about the bigger grid, the United States grid or Western United States grid. Where are your thoughts in relationship to the Whitehead Station? Power plant? Do you see that as adding more engines, or is this just under evaluation, or what are your thoughts about that?
That's a great question. It's really dependent on the growth of the city and the growth in demand. As we see more businesses come in and as we see more population growth, there's certainly going to be opportunities to potentially grow that. What needs to happen, I think, more immediately is we have some some older equipment that's difficult to service. And so to ensure reliability with that equipment, which is really comprises about half of the capacity we have to generate there, at some point we'll have to start coming up with a strategy to replace that with the newer engines.
And these are the two legacy engines that are so old that we need to create a little bit better reliability to them.
I think ideally, in a perfect world where cost weren't an option, there'd be great opportunities to significantly expand that. But you have to weigh the true demand and what we need on a what they call base load basis, which is our kind of constant, consistent demand throughout the year, regardless of season. You have to weigh that with how much energy production capability you actually need, because it's very, very expensive. And so you balance that and you put some strategy in place, which we're doing currently, and then we'll have a plan.
You know, it would be interesting in maybe a subsequent, more detailed podcast to where you can talk about base load and variabilities and during the peaking times and that sort of thing. Maybe not today, but there may come a time when a citizen wants to learn a little bit more about it, and you can have yourself or some of the people that you work with explain that a little bit more. Well, let's take it a little bit bigger because, a couple months ago we had this outage. And everybody said, Springville's out. Well, Springville wasn't out, but there was the larger grid that was out. There was a fire at the Spanish Fork substation, Rocky Mountain substation. And so talk about how we fit into this larger grid.
Yes, and it actually is a great example, the June outage we had, which lasted a couple of hours. And there was a piece of equipment that failed at the Rocky Mountain Power substation right at the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon. And what happens is, most people don't realize, is that most of our power, or all of our power, is transmitted through Rocky Mountain. And then we have two substations, Baxter and Dry Creek. Dry Creek is on 1600 South. That's ultimately how our city is fed. And that same substation of Rocky Mountain Power also feeds 4 other cities, which are part of an organization called Southern Utah Valley Power Systems.
So those would be cities like?
Spanish Fork, Payson, the Strawberry Service District.
Okay.
These are all things Salem. All other cities that are involved, and they were also experiencing that same outage that we did. Again, because its gateway, in a sense, had failed, and so it cut off 5 or 6 cities at the same time.
Interesting.
Even portions of Provo, I believe, were cut off.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about Rocky Mountain Power, and lots of questions is, well, do we buy our energy through Rocky Mountain Power? And I think it's important for people to understand there's 2 sides to this. One is the transmission across some lines, which everyone sees, and the actual power, where it's generated at. Like, for example, a lot of people who drive down toward Payson, and they see that steam coming out of a building. Well, that's a power generation facility. And why don't you maybe explain some of the places that Springville City gets its power from? And then we transmit it across other people's lines to get to Springville. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's you're correct. And it's important that you note that it's called the Nebo Power Plant, which is just down off I-15, as you mentioned, just as you come into Payson. And that one's particularly important to us because it provides us, as a city, we have an allocation of that, about 20 to 24 megawatts at any given time. And so that provides most of our, what I called earlier, baseload power for that consistent demand we have. So that one is very important and key to this city. We also have allocations, and we're part of many projects which produce power. We have solar projects. We have hydropower projects. In fact, we have some hydropower facilities right up Springville Canyon, Pablo Creek Canyon.
Oh, interesting.
Where we have some generation facilities. Provo Canyon, we also have 2 facilities that we are provided hydropower from. We have wind generation sites that we have allocations to. And in addition to, as I mentioned, solar, and we also have some natural gas plants, which is what Nebo is, currently. But we have a variety of different sources, and we're always investigating, looking for new resources to again, purchase economically the power that we require as a city.
That's great. So we're tied in with the larger grid. So when you hear about outages that are in Texas or California, does that affect us? Are we part of that national grid, or is that a more regionalized grid?
I'd say they're more regionalized,
Okay.
and with certain local issues, you may see shifts in demand. So when they've had the changes to regulatory practices in Texas, for example, and you remember a couple of years ago they had issues where power was spiking in terms of price. You may see demand change where you have power being drawn to other parts of the country, but again, most of our stuff in our immediate that immediately impacts us is here locally.
Wonderful. Great. Anything else that you want to add in relationship to the grid, the big grid?
Not necessarily, other than just the fact that we need to recognize how interdependent we are with these other cities, and it's important that we are currently collaborating with them just to ensure that there's reliability and the ability to grow here within Utah County.
Great. One last question. We see lots of people using electric cars now. A lot of people are plugging in and recharging and that sort of thing, and some of them are doing it by solar, but lots of them are doing it by just plugging in. What's that doing for you? What does that do for the citizens of Springville? What are your thoughts about that?
So it creates it's a beneficial thing. Obviously, it's good to get away from fossil fuels, although we're still generating the power primarily using fossil fuels. When you add charging stations or people are using chargers at home, it certainly increases demand on the system, and so. What that does, it just impacts your strategies and your planning for the future. We have to ensure that we have the power and the resources available to us without creating a bunch of price volatility or interruptions in service, so that regardless of how much build out and how much adoption there is in electric vehicles, for example, the case you just used, it's not going to be disruptive. Mm-hmm. And we still have the capability to grow. That's what makes it difficult as a city and a power provider, is that we have to understand what our growth is going to be in the city and try and project those loads, to impact things, water, power, all these different, utility functions that we provide as a city. We have to plan in great detail and hopefully be right to the extent that we have the resources necessary without causing huge price impacts or impacts to people's pocketbooks.
The power you get from the grid is not like flipping a faucet on and off. You have to go out and buy these contracts, and we can do this on another podcast, but you get lower cost the more sure you are about the package that you buy. And these expensive times is when you run those engines to be able to shave that off for the benefit. So. Well, this has been great. So anything else you'd like to add to help the citizens understand a little more of what you do?
I would just encourage them, if you hear a term or come up with something or want more or have more interest or detail in learning about this, we're certainly available at any time, and we have a lot of good staff members that would be happy to answer questions, and we interact with the public a great deal.
And you would welcome a tour from somebody who would love
100%. In fact, we had that open house
right.
A few weeks ago. And so I just encourage people to come out and see the resources that we have available to us as residents. It truly is a great thing. Just quickly from a public power perspective versus Rocky Mountain, which is a corporation, any type of profit and I don't want to call it profit because it's really just money that goes into the operations and covers expenses for power generation and procuring the power we need for the residents. But any additional money doesn't go into the hands of shareholders, like in the case of Rocky Mountain. That money goes directly back into the city. Mm-hmm. And so what a great resource. We're able to provide reliable, cost-effective power that's comparable to everybody else. But instead of the money going out of the city, from the residents and the rates that they pay, the money stays here. And I think that's just a great asset.
Wonderful. Well, this has been great. Jason, thank you so much for all you do. And if you'd please pass on to all of your employees, thank you for the great work and the great service. We just appreciate it. And when we flip that switch, we kind of expect it to happen. So thank you.
We do. Thank you.